So I'd like to introduce Neil White. Now, the very long title he's got up on his slide is Editor-in-Chief, Local World Derbyshire and East Staffordshire. And he said, don't worry, I'll explain to them what that means, so I'll leave that with him. But I'm really pleased that he's agreed to come and speak to us. I heard Neil speaking at an NCTJ conference where he talked about media ethics in regional papers, and Neil is exactly the sort of person who might be giving you your first job on a local paper. He also runs his own film website, so I'd be really interested to hear about how you combine being an editor with doing that as well.
No sleep.
Okay, so come and please welcome Neil White.
I'm a bit after the Lord Mayor's show. I do appreciate that, sir. You've heard an awful lot of speeches this week, so I'm very much keener on burning questions that you might have in your heads, and Jan's right in a lot of ways there. I know you heard the guys from Halifax this morning. At the Derby Telegraph, we're likely to be where your first port of call is. You might want to go on eventually to ITV and BBC and all the places, Sunday Express, all the places you've heard from this week, but it's quite likely you would come to somewhere in the regional press. And so you probably haven't heard much about the regional press this week. I'm Editor-in-Chief, as it says, of 4 different newspapers and their websites: Derby Telegraph, Burton Mail, that's in Burton-on-Trent, Ashbourne News Telegraph, where they play the famous Shrovetide football game, and the Uttoxeter Advertiser. But once upon a time, I was just like you. That's me when beards were in fact fashionable 30 years ago as well as right now, although not quite as well groomed as perhaps they are nowadays. That's me at the time of being in Germany on my degree. I did European Studies. And it looks like I was having a jolly good time, doesn't it? But at that time, what was still important to me, as is important to you now, is work experience. You cannot get anywhere in this industry at all without a CV that is worth looking at. I started when I was just 15 at Coventry Hospital radio station and had a great time there. That enabled me to interview the editor of the Coventry Telegraph. He set me on when I was just 16 or 17 to cover parks games for the local sports paper on a Saturday afternoon. Teams with no numbers. It was dead difficult to do, but we used to do running copy and had to dive for the phone at half-time to ring over about 100 words. And because I'd done that, I got some work experience on Mercia Sound, the local radio station, as it was then in Coventry. And I was lucky enough, at just the age of 17 and 18, to cover football, including my hometown team, Coventry City, on a couple of occasions, which was a bit of a wow. And I don't know that could happen nowadays, but it did then. My point being is that all of that meant that I eventually met the former editor of the Coventry Telegraph at the end of my degree. He was the editor by then of the Birmingham Mail and gave me a job. So it's nothing really short of who you know is more important than what you know. You can come out of these degrees with a first. If you haven't got a CV or have got contacts within the industry, you won't get a job, is pretty much where I would come from on that. So really, I understand you've got a really good setup as far as Yorkshire Evening Post is concerned. That's brilliant. I absolutely recommend that you take advantage of it or go back to your hometown areas during the break and work for papers there. We have lots of them, for example, at Derby Telegraph. So I would like to say that things haven't changed in certain aspects, work experience being one of them, but things have changed massively over 30 years in lots of different aspects. When I started in the trade, the typewriter was what we used. We didn't have any other technology than a pad and a pen, and we used a thing like a phone box. Has anyone actually ever been in a phone box? Fantastic. I wouldn't even know where to find one nowadays. One of the great things when I worked in Birmingham was that the news desk would get really irritated if you were out on a job and you didn't phone in. Now, that would be easy to you now, wouldn't it? And it was easy to me this morning when I was on the way up on the motorway going hands-free. Fact of the matter is, you had to find a phone box that wasn't vandalised at that point, or that even worked. And a lot of the phone boxes in Birmingham were vandalised. So the only one that we knew worked for sure was the one that was outside of our office. So you'd actually go on your job, come all the way back to the office and phone in and make sure that you called the desk, even though you were standing virtually next to them. Anyway, Birmingham, life was different then. Birmingham Mail had 9 editions every day. They printed from 9:25 until 3:30 in the afternoon. That stood me in really good stead because actually nowadays, of course, news is 24 hours a day again. And we went through a period whereby we went to morning papers and it wasn't so fast-flowing as it is now. Now, everything is straight online, as you know, and I'll come back to that in a second. There was, of course, a different culture back then. Those were the days when drinking in pubs with contacts was absolutely encouraged. Leveson nowadays would tell you that is completely forbidden. We were invited to police Christmas do's. You were friends with the police. I've got several friends who are police officers now, and I often tell them that really when we next speak, we should probably be accompanied by a press officer. God knows how that would work. There were great stories in those days in Birmingham. I was a reporter when a plane came down on the M1 at Kegworth. I literally was standing opposite the scene that you see there with some people saved, but many people not. It was a traumatic night. I was also the Super Prix reporter in Birmingham. Birmingham used to have its own motor racing through the city streets, and I was lucky enough to cover that. And probably my greatest moment in journalism was being reporter on Coventry City winning the FA Cup. Now, this sounds really, really unlikely to any football fans out there, but Coventry City did once win the FA Cup. I was there, I know, I reported on it, and I touched the cup as a reporter as it was lifted on the balcony in Coventry City Centre. They're now about to get relegated to Division 4, unfortunately. There were no press officers when we worked in Birmingham. There were no paid-for counsellors. There were no spin doctors. There were no football agents. All of those things didn't exist. And so you can tell how time has moved on. Within my first couple of months, we trained on computers. And that's absolutely very, very similar to the sort of thing that we worked on. And they had an internal message service, which we thought was dazzling. And, of course, now you have emails and mobile phone messages and everything you can imagine, which we'll come on to soon. So I'm privileged because I've lived through a time of humongous, humongous change. There were no major differences when I moved from Birmingham to a national news agency. We provided a news service for 25 regional papers. It turned to us instead of Press Association. And in 1997, I moved to the Nottingham Post, where things had moved on a tad. And we had a phone. And phones, all they were useful for was actually making phone calls, surprisingly enough, which, of course, is very, very different to nowadays. They're not the information exchange they are nowadays, of course. Around the time of the millennium, we were nervously putting our toe into the water with regard to the internet. It seems incredible, but that's only 15 years ago. And at the time, we were very much still a regional newspaper industry. And then the explosion began. Google only came into the world in 1998. My daughter here is only 21, and she was already 5 years old by the time Google appeared. Facebook, which no one could do without, only came online in 2004, invented by Zuckerberg. And Twitter, which I'm told I'll be hundreds of messages about this speech by the time I finish it, only arrived in 2006. And so you can imagine my career, I'd been more than 20 years old by the time Twitter even appeared. These are, of course, tools now which it seems totally inconceivable that we don't use on a day-to-day basis. SEO on Google is something that we absolutely need to work harder and harder on, achieving rating on Google for our stories. Facebook, we link with the public every single day, every moment of the day on Facebook, and Twitter, exactly the same. This is how we publicise our stories nowadays, as you know, and I'll come on to that a little bit more in a second. Well, I won't come on to another slide because it seems to have died. None had immediate impact, none Google, Facebook and Twitter. We just thought they were flash in the pan, to be absolutely truthful, because newspapers were so huge at that time. Nottingham Post, for example, where I was working, was making £15 million a year profit. Frankly, the journalists had a very nice time, and we caught taxis home, even when we went to the pub and so on, late at night. things have changed hugely, and efficiencies are completely different to the way we were. Oh, I've got it back. I moved in 2010 to the Derby Telegraph, where I was deputy editor and then now editor, and we changed our line of the Telegraph. We redesigned it this year, and that's what it looks like now. And that was a column that I wrote only this Monday. Since I've been there, I've had to learn things like Facebook, Twitter, and all social media. And about late 2010, it suddenly occurred to me I knew nothing. My daughter knew more than I did about Facebook and Twitter. I wasn't part of the revolution. And so I taught myself Blogger, and I went on Facebook and went on Twitter, where I suppose you've all got 3,000 followers now, but I can happily say I've got 3,000 followers. And I did a thing called Every Film. I decided that my Everest would be to try and watch literally every film release in this country. That includes Bollywood and Tamil and all that sort of thing. I go all over the country watching Turkish films and bonkers stuff. So that was 2011. It's 2015, and I still do it. And so on my archive, everyfilm.co.uk, there are 2,600 films reviewed on there. This year already, I've watched 105 in 2015. And how do I do it as well as editing newspapers? The honest answer is I don't sleep much. But yeah, last night I watched 2 films. Tonight I'll watch 2 films, etc., etc. I suppose from a hobby point of view, and it shows I can create something, the ultimate accolade for me this year was that Radio 5 Live rang me up to be their pre-Oscars pundit. So I was on the Nicky Campbell and Rachel Burden show talking about that. Back to newspapers. Well, this is how we've changed now, and you probably all know it already. Hayley's asked me to do an interview afterwards. But look, there's our reporter from Derby County's game with Fulham. After the match, we do videos in the way that you would anticipate. We're on Instagram. We are involved in Facebook and all of the social medias, as you would anticipate. Now, what I would say, and I'm much more, as I said, interested in your questions, but one question I'm sure you will have would be, what is the future of regional newspapers? Well, regional newspapers and their websites might be seen as irrelevant to some, but they're not irrelevant to others, because David Cameron there has been to my office twice in the last 3 years. During this election, I guarantee he'll be there some more, and only 2 weeks ago, Ed Balls and Eric Pickles were there because they want to get their views in our newspapers. So they see newspapers and their associated websites as having huge power. In terms of our audience, yes, we only sell 24,000 Derby Telegraphs where we might have sold 60,000 years ago, but our internet audience at the end of 2012 was 20,000. Last weekend, on one day, it was 100,000 unique users. So between 80,000 and 100,000 people are going onto our site every day. At one point last year, when we did a story that went viral, the amount of unique users who went on our site was 411,000. These are figures that the regional press would never have dreamed about. And to say that we have no impact anymore, or we're not relevant anymore, is just not true. I've done some fancy pictures around the edge of that. I didn't do the PowerPoint, actually. Somebody else did it for me. I'm not nearly competent enough. My life's been great in journalism. I've been to all of these places thanks to the job. So I've been to Gambia, I've been to Israel, I've been to South Africa, I've been to Hong Kong, amongst many other places. It's been an absolutely fantastic job. It's one that I would recommend to anyone. I've had huge fun. There is huge pressure, but the point of everything that I'm trying to say is that if you're enthusiastic, if you really want it, if you have great work experience and you really push yourselves, and you can acclimatise to change, because I don't know where the future will be, then you will have a fantastic career. Right, that's me, and I really don't want to talk any more than that. That's just me banging on, really. But I'm dying to hear some questions, please. Well, I made it up, really. I think somebody asked me this not long ago. I think do something that nobody else has done. So when I know it's a bit grand, but in expectation. But when I sat around the blog, I thought, well, nobody else watches every film. Yeah, Mark Kermode reviews films brilliantly, and I can't write as well as Mark Kermode does. But nobody watches all the films, do they? So now I've got a burgeoning audience in India. I've got a subtitler of Tamil films that WhatsApps me. So never used that phrase before, but WhatsApps me on a regular basis about Tamil movies. I saw one in Sheffield on Sunday afternoon, and so nobody would do that. There's just no British journalist is going that far, and so it's make it different. Really, I think you've got to come from a completely different perspective. Go for a niche, and I think you'll be successful. But Blogger's dead easy. I mean, you can go onto Blogger and import in. I mean, who's got a blog out there? I guess you all have. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, go onto Blogger and you can. An idiot like me can import videos and pictures. Frankly, anybody can. I mean, it's dead easy. Very quiet for journalists. Journalists ask questions.
I wanted to ask about the ethics that I heard you talk about the NCTJ. Your paper had an interesting take on whether you should cover certain sorts of stories. You were sort of asking your audience whether was this going too far, what should be covered?
Yeah, well, this year I got a bit of a pasting in the industry media over this. We had an incident whereby there was a public servant who worked for a public utility who had been looking at pornography, and we got wind of the fact that he'd been suspended, put on gardening leave, and we knew his name. And what occurred to me at conference, newspaper conference or website conference, was that we could use the story. We had all the details to use the story, but I knew it would ruin that person's life. And actually, what they were doing, was it significantly in the public interest? Sure, I'd looked at a computer at work, but actually it wasn't child porn they were looking at. It was pornography that's certainly not illegal. And so we had a conversation, and I was unsure about it. My colleagues were more sure. They thought we should run the story. And so through Facebook, I gave very limited detail to the public, but asked them what they thought. And universally, 50 comments later, they said, don't run the story, you're going to ruin his life, it's not relevant, that actually we just think it's sensational and so on, so we didn't run it. In the industry, a few people said that was the last straw, that I couldn't make my mind up, I wasn't a courageous editor, I actually thought I had more bottle asking the public myself. But my view was, I don't know everything, so we have tools now that we would never have dreamt about years ago, that we can consult the public in a way that we never would have been able to before. I can go on my mobile phone and I can see to the minute what they're looking at on our site right now, in terms of overall audience and individual stories. Now, that is something that we can't ignore, and I think is really vital to the future of the industry. Now, sometimes we'll think we're on a winner and we've done a story and it just doesn't resonate in the way that the public actually reacts, or that we expect, sorry. However, we'll keep plugging on, and the more that they give us their feedback, the more that will help us design our sites, design our newspapers in the future. It's as clear as that, really.
Have you done that since?
No, I don't. That was the point as well of the criticism that came, where does it end? It ends where I decide it ends. I mean, that I'm pretty confident after 30 years in the industry, I know what story is. But at that point, we were genuinely torn. I was genuinely torn. And therefore, it seemed to me the best way out was to consult the public. Now, there's various other times that I've done things that aren't particularly popular with the industry, but that doesn't bother me either. And frankly, I think that thinking about the readers and what they care about is absolutely paramount. Otherwise, we will lose our audience. And we've got to provide services that the readers want, and we've got to provide them in the fashion that they want. If they see the Derby Telegraph or associated newspapers as being sensationalists, quick fix organisations, they'll just desert us. And so it's really, really important that we're plugged into what our readership requires.
I just want to talk about experiences for budding journalists. I just talked to you a scenario. If you had a student who'd graduated with a first, they really got their head down and did some good work at university, but they had no work experience, compared to a student who, say, got a 2-2, for example, but their CV was really impressive, they've had 2 or 3 really good work experiences. Which person would you be more likely to?
The latter.
Yeah.
I'm trying to think of a person that I've signed. Only one person I've signed in the last 4 or 5 years hadn't been at the Derby Telegraph on work experience. Now, and they came recommended, so and they had to come through the interview process. Frankly, I've got a job coming up just now, an unusual one actually. I've never appointed such a person before, to do social media and our What's On online coverage. But I would doubt that I will advertise, because I will be looking to people either I know or people in the industry know through the work experience before I even put that advert up. Because if I advertise now, I guarantee you 300 applications. Now that will take me forever, and ultimately I will get down to a point where I'm contacting people in the industry in any case. So, really, really important. Who you know, work experience, totally vital. And the thing is, the people we've signed have been great enthusiasts. Of course, we get somebody on work experience every single week. Some will be better than others. But those that are really good, we'll have back, and then back, and then back, and then back, and they'll become part of the furniture. And when a job comes up, we're just giving it to them.
One more question as well. When you find yourself watching films such as The Human Centipede, should be writing an article.
Or Human Centipede 2, actually. Watch them both. Sorry.
Do you ever think, hang on a minute, I should be writing an article here instead of watching this?
Writing an article, I mean, it's my spare time, isn't it? I mean, the film thing is my spare time. So that's nothing to do with the job. All the film thing is enhanced in terms of the job is my knowledge of social media. So I know what I'm talking about in terms of Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, Google, SEO, AdSense, all these sort of things, because I've done it I've done it in my own time. So watching films has just become something that's, I suppose, that I've gained a bit of notoriety for, but it's completely separate to the job. I do film reviews. Okay, my top 20 appeared in 20 different papers at Christmas, that's true. But that's Group have taken that, Local World have taken that, but it's supplementary to the job.
The first thing I was just going to say, about 10 years ago I used to work on these Oxford advertising.
Oh, do you? Oh, I don't.
It's still going well. The main thing I was going to ask about was, when you're looking for people who are coming in, are you looking for people who have good old-fashioned journalistic skills, or are you prioritising the digital skills, or is it now a combination of both?
We're finding that if you sign somebody that doesn't have the bedrock of journalist skills, then they're not as good. And so the journalist skills, accuracy, number one, being able to write tightly. Bear in mind Twitter, to write 140 characters pithily to have a following is an art. You've got to be, we expect our journalists to write headlines on digital almost as soon as they start. So, they've got to, but that doesn't come from somebody that has anything other than journalist skills. So the ability to write a headline, the ability to write pithily, the ability to be accurate, 100% accurate, that's in their contract. These are very, very important things. You can't just have a sea of rubbish. And what's really important to understand is that we are the last word. People come to the Derby Telegraph in Derby. There are loads and loads of people who project news, if you like, on Twitter or on social media and so on. But people come to our site because we are the last word. We are the trusted word. Now, if we are inaccurate, we lose that, don't we? So that's why journalism, to my mind, and journalist skills will always be important. Are journalists the same being as the person that went out to the phone box 30 years ago? Not quite, but in essence, the same, really. And I still love a story in the same way that I did then.
With the general election coming up, how would you as an editor decide how to cover that in local papers? Because we've heard from national editors saying they back political parties, but with local papers, how would you feed that into it?
Well, we're apolitical, and so it's very important that we have a balance. We will have all of the parties try to get us to cover them more than the others, and we have to draw that balance. UKIP are particularly good at sending letters at the moment. They send them through en masse, but we have to temper those because otherwise it looks like there's a lack of balance. The Conservative Party tends to be people that visit us a lot, but we have to temper that a little bit so that you're just not saying, well, here's another Tory minister that's turned up. I would really want it to be, and the staff know this, that we are totally even-handed all the way through. I think it'll be a fascinating election, by the way, because of the various different dimensions. The talk already in a poll today that we're looking towards a hung parliament, so I think it's going to be fascinating. But that makes it even more important that we don't skew the local population. Now, in Derby North, as it happens, we've got one of the most marginal seats in the country, so that's why they're all in town. But we've got to make sure we're even-handed about that coverage. More questions from you journalists? Yep.
You mentioned how it's important to have like old school journalistic skills, but now there's more of a demand for like video and online content. So somebody who has a lot of video skills, would they not be more desirable in the industry now?
I think the journalistic skills I talked about is a foundation. So actually the principles of journalism are the foundation. But don't misunderstand me. You've got to have all that modern day abilities. So yes, video, social media, all of those skills have got to be part of the set. So we wouldn't take you on if you didn't have those. But it's almost taken for read, I guess, nowadays, if you come out of courses like the ones here, that there will be elements of that within your abilities. So absolutely. But I don't think a video person on their own, and we've tried this, a video person on their own who doesn't have that sense, that news sense, will find it quite difficult to fit in with a newsroom and will be a little behind the pace, if you see what I mean. A newsroom is incredibly fast. You know, from 6:30 in the morning we start work until 11 o'clock at night. Clearly not the same people, but the Derby Telegraph gears up 6:30, 6 o'clock, 6:30, first person, until the last person is at 11 o'clock at night. And throughout that day, stories are coming thick and fast. And so the people that are really, one of the other skills that you need to have is to be, fleet-footed. You need to be really, really quick because reporters will write normally 3-page leads for the newspaper. They'll be able to write in a day. They'll be at the same time doing some social media. They'll be putting all their stories onto the web as well. And to be able to juggle that, and I tell you what's absolutely true, and why work experience is really important, is that people coming out of university find that mind-blowing. Because you've been at a stage where you're doing work that may last over a week, sometimes months, and so on. Do this pre-prep work, don't have any of that. It's like that, we want it now. Now, I find that hugely exciting, probably because back in 1984, as I said, we had 9 editions a day, and the presses kept rolling, and you got your story, and whap bang, it was in the next edition, and then seeing it on the front page was great. But now it's just the same because the speed is let's get it out there. We want to be first. And interestingly, we not just want to be first against the BBC or wherever happen to be our competitors. We want to be first against the people who are putting out on social media and so on. I mean, Jan made the point today. I was caught in traffic on the M1 and she'd seen a picture of a flaming van which had meant I had to do a detour on the M1 this morning. That wouldn't have been presumably any news organisation. It was just a person that saw it. So we need to be ahead all the time, and the pressure is on for us to be ahead. So that is an absolutely fundamental journalism skill that we need to be quick. Now, I think that's changed a little bit at unis, and I would be almost putting pressure on university lecturers nowadays to make sure that pace of delivery is something that guys can work with, because we've been a little bit disappointed, and I've not had anyone from here, so I'm sure it's great here, but we've been a little bit disappointed when we've had people in that have been suddenly going, whoa, this is like really quite a lot harder than we ever thought. Oh, we have to work Saturdays and Sundays? Yeah. We have to work nights, do we? Yes. And we have to work at this sort of pace, do we? Yes. And so it really, really is fast moving.
Do you feel that technology is going to replace like newspapers?
Pardon?
Do you feel that technology is going to replace newspapers?
Well, by when, I suppose, is the question on that, isn't it? If I'm totally honest, on a Sunday, I used to buy 12 national newspapers when I was a news editor at Nottingham Post. So I would cut them out with my scissors and, say these are the sort of stories we should be doing on a Monday. And so how many newspapers do I not buy nowadays on a Sunday? I buy one if I'm on holiday. I use my phone. I go on social media straight away. I want to see what we're doing on our website, of course, and what others are doing on theirs. I have an app which gives me headlines from Sky News and BBC. It's probably doing it right now, but it's on silent. I can't say that eventually then technology will take over completely. How long that will be, I don't know. I'm very confident. I mean, we still make a lot of money in newspapers at the moment, so I'm very confident of the here and now, and I'm very confident of the short and medium term. But what it'll look like in 30 years' time, well, I couldn't have predicted this 30 years ago, could I? So who knows? It's incredibly difficult in the media industry now to take a crystal ball and see what's going to happen, because there might just be the next big thing we haven't even thought of. And that's certainly this case. I hadn't thought. I knew about computers in 1984, but I certainly hadn't thought about email, internet, mobile phone, and all the technologies we have now. Bear in mind, Sky News didn't even exist then. It was 4 TV channels. It always seems really hard to believe, but hey, that's happened.
Are you entirely web first? Do you put everything out, or do you hold stuff back to the paper?
No, more and more we're web first. The sport is entirely web first. Breaking news is entirely web first. It's only really the occasions that we have an exclusive story that we want to put it in the papers and time it to coincide with the web, or else if something's under embargo. So I know there's a big story happening in Derby this afternoon, but it's under embargo. So actually, it will be web first at 5 o'clock. But quite often, embargoes might be until 6 or 7 in the morning to accommodate the newspaper as well as the web. But yeah, it's more and more web first, and then we have to find out how we're going to change that for the paper and move it on, and that becomes an interesting dynamic in itself. Any more? You can ask me favourite films if you like. Huh? My favourite film is It's a Wonderful Life. We have a poster at the top of my stairs, James Stewart. But my favourite films in recent years, what was number 1 last year? 12 Years a Slave was number 1 last year. With the Leonardo DiCaprio film, Wolf of Wall Street was number 2.
There are some things, the more you do it, the less fun it becomes. Not everything will sound.
Yeah, not watching films.
Yeah. I used to be in entertainment, right, and I remember reviewing films became like a chore after a while. I lost my love for movies. Sometimes people would ask me, did you enjoy the movie? And I wouldn't be able to answer. And it became like it was sport as well when I started watching a lot of sport. I just lost the enjoyment because I was doing it as a job. Do you ever feel that might happen with the movies? Because you say you watch hundreds of them. Yeah, I do.
Well, it happened actually. It did. My ambition, if I'd been sitting in your seat, would have been to be a football reporter. I was inspired by John Watson on Match of the Day, and I thought, everyone can do that, which they obviously can't. And I ended up actually covering Coventry City, which was my hometown team, so a dream for the Birmingham papers. I found out that actually people involved in football weren't as nice as I thought they might be. I found out about the football industry, and it totally took the shine off watching football for me. And so in the early 90s, I said, I don't want to do that anymore, which was interesting. The film thing, I suppose I'm intoxicated at the moment by knowledge. I probably know more about films than most, having built it up over the last 4 or 5 years. And so it is a bit of a kick to be rung by BBC radio stations and the like, to say, can you give your opinion on something? Will it get to the point where it's too much? Well, it doesn't so far. And I am a member of a golf club, and I am a Coventry City season ticket holder, and various other things. And my family see me a reasonable amount, and they might come to the movies with me as well. Bear in mind, my wife comes to movies with me as well. So actually, it's become a bit of a social event. Incredibly, she'll even go on her own if she's missed a movie. So it's become a thing that we share. But the writing of it, I think, is probably the tricky element. Going to watch a movie is easy, but when I'm having to write it up now, because that takes about half an hour per movie, and I'm always about 8 or 9 movies behind, and you're thinking, I did 2 this morning before I came out, and you're thinking, yeah, that's now starting to that's starting to bite into me a little bit. And the trouble is, when you write about movies, of course, I don't know whether any of you have done reviews, but when you write about things, the easiest thing is to write when it's good or bad. The most difficult review is actually when they're middling, and they're just a bit average, and you're thinking, well, I've used all those words at least 1,000 times before, what am I going to say? I think when I'm writing a 5 out of 10, 6 out of 10 up, I'm thinking I'm a bit bored of doing this now, but otherwise, no.
It's the same with sport. You mentioned John Watson. It's interesting because after that cup final in 1987,
the greatest cup final ever.
Yeah, I remember that because I just tweeted it because I remember because they beat Spurs.
Well, they did. You're making me well up now about Coventry City.
Major events like the Oscars, they sort of dominated the headlines of the Nationals the morning after. Do you think that is newsworthy, or do you think whatever people are interested in is newsworthy?
Well, I mean, ultimately, the public, as I was indicating a little earlier on, the public gets what the public wants. And so if the Daily Mail online is full of Oscar coverage, it's because it's getting huge figures for that. I would say that it's probably worth it at that moment because of its of substantial audience. The tittle tattle that goes around, it doesn't do much for me, I have to say. What Keira Knightley's wearing or whatever is not particularly my bag, but clearly they must get audiences, otherwise they wouldn't do it. I think that's pretty much the answer.
I've just got a couple of quick football questions. One was about Coventry, actually.
Good God.
Reported on the club and somebody goes, what's your take on the whole situation regarding the Rico, CISO and the council and the entire mess that's created?
Well, bear in mind that I stood on a podium in front of 7,000 people in Coventry with my Coventry City shirt on when we were involved in the protests, saying we're not going to go to Northampton. It's all a bit devastating, really. I watched the team from 1968 to 2001 in the top flight. I don't suppose anyone can remember Coventry being in the Premier League, but they certainly were. I've been to places like Liverpool where we've won. I've certainly been to Old Trafford where we've won regularly, and seen us put 5 past Liverpool, 5 past Chelsea, and the like. And now, last night, we managed a inglorious 0-1 against Barnsley. And certainly we've lost this season to the likes of Rochdale and so on. So it's heartbreaking. I sit next to my mum and dad at football still. They're in their mid-late 70s. We live and breathe Coventry, and for it to be undermined by a combination of its owners and the council, who frankly couldn't get their act together, to completely diminish a football club is a total disaster as far as we're concerned. The audience is there because on the first day back at the Rico, we were banned for a year, if anyone doesn't know. We weren't banned, we banned ourselves for a year. We went to play at Northampton, if anyone else doesn't know, in front of 1,000/2,000 supporters. But on the first day back at the Rico Arena, it was sold out, 27,000 were in there. And now we're back down to gates of 6,000 again. So somebody's done something wrong, haven't they?
The only thing I was going to ask you, a quick one, was what are your plans if Derby get into the Premier League?
Well, that's a really interesting one because Derby, although they lost last night, 2-0 at Brighton, and they lost at Fulham on Saturday. But they're very confident they are going to go up, or they were when I talked to the Chief Executive 2 weeks ago. And actually competing with the Nationals, which have a reporter designated to every football team in the Premier League, is a lot different to covering a team in the Championship, whereas You know, there's our journalist goes along with the radio journalist to the press conferences, and there are seldom any other people there. But we're talking about all sorts of stuff, you know. We're talking about monitoring whenever Derby County gets a mention, even from pundits on phone-ins and so on, that actually to do 4 or 5 lines will get an audience. There's no doubt at the moment that Derby County, in terms of our internet audience, is absolutely huge for us. Derby County has a massive following anyway. It sells out very often at the iPro. Derby is a big, big football city, and we're going to have to try and be ahead of all of the national pundits at the same time. The one thing that works in journalism, and this is absolutely a bedrock of being a journalist, is your relationships. And so we have a very good relationship, a very positive relationship with Derby County, which we think will stand us in good stead when that comes up. And I've been reassured by Derby County it would. But I really hope they do go up. Derby's really well run. There's some really good people behind the scenes at Derby County. And although I'm a Coventry fan, they also know that I look for Derby County's results by the minute when they're playing as well. And I really hope they go up. Any more for any more?
Well, you know, everything. You invite a local paper editor and you talk about Tamil films and League One football, so it's just like the entire...
Don't say League One football too loudly, Jan. I don't like it.
So that's fabulous. So, you know, yet another insightful and really interesting talk. So can we thank Neil White for